didn't start off as a democracy. We started off as a slave republic of white male property owners. Democracy in America is always either shrinking and shriveling away, or it's expanding and growing. And we just got to get back on the growth track. Ukraine is Vladimir Putin's January the 6th, the Democrats versus the autocrats all over the world.
Thank you very much for talking to us, Representative Raskin. It seems very strange and wonderful for me calling you that, because I knew you as a boy, I knew your father, and I've also really appreciate the wonderful book, Unthinkable, that you've just written, both about what you've been doing with impeachment and about Tommy.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Anthony, and I appreciate that. That means a lot to me. And I've been looking forward to talking to you.
Great. And you have played a particularly important role as a representative in terms of managing the impeachment process. And I wonder if you could explain to an international audience how it happened, what actually happened.
There was a large crowd assembled and lured to Washington by Donald Trump's promise of a wild protest. That wild protest of somewhere between 40 and 50,000 people became a mob riot, the worst mob riot in the history of the US Capitol. And it ended up injuring, wounding, hospitalizing 150 of our officers who suffered broken jaws, noses, necks, vertebrae, ribs, lost fingers, broken legs, traumatic brain injury, post-traumatic stress syndrome, you name it. Okay. That was the outer ring of the action. The middle ring of the action was what I call the insurrection itself. And this was a large band of domestic violent extremist groups, mostly white nationalist groups that had been drawn together by the president's political entourage. So that included a nasty neo-fascist group called the Proud Boys, who Donald Trump had told on air during our first presidential debate, stand back and stand by. The Oath Keepers, the Three Percenters, two extremist groups that have been charged with seditious conspiracy, meaning conspiracy to overthrow the government. The QAnon networks, which mobilized hundreds of people to come in. The militia groups, the Aryan Nations, the Unification Church, a group called First Amendment Praetorian. In any event, there were more than a dozen groups that had been engaged in paramilitary training and then acted as the frontline vanguard stormtroopers of the whole march. They were the first ones to assault the officers. They were the first ones to begin to smash our windows, tear our doors down, and then invade and occupy the Capitol, shutting down the counting of electoral college votes for the first time in American history. Okay, that was not the scariest ring. The third and final and innermost ring was the ring of the coup. And that was the scariest ring. And coup is not a word familiar in American political parlance internally in America. We think of a coup as something that takes place against a president. This was a coup orchestrated by the president against the vice president and against the Congress. And the whole purpose was to overthrow Joe Biden's 306 to 232 majority in the electoral college process. Trump had been essentially planning to delegitimize the election result. He had been going around the country saying, the only way I can lose this election is if it's stolen. So he was preparing his followers for his assault on the election. And on election night, rather than conceding the way that Hillary Clinton had done 4 years before, he said, we were on our way to win this election. In fact, we did win this election.
And that in a group, I mean, they were organizing the Proud Boys and the other circle. You mean they were sitting there planning what they should do and what the thing was?
This is just going to take me a moment to unfurl, if you don't mind, Anthony, because yes, there was some coordination between the coup and the insurrection, but you got to understand what their aim was. And maybe I can skip a bunch of steps. They tried to overthrow the election a number of different ways, including in court, and it was rejected by more than 60 federal and state judges. When we got to January 6th, the whole point was to try to get Vice President Mike Pence, who sits as a ceremonial figure over the Electoral College proceeding, which is the peaceful transfer of power. And the whole point was to try to get him, for the first time in American history, to get the vice president to declare extra constitutional, non-existent powers to nullify Electoral College votes being turned in by the governors from the various states. And if they could just get Pence to agree to return to Arizona, Georgia, and Pennsylvania, their electors, it would have lowered Joe Biden's total in the Electoral College from 306 to below 270. And then under the 12th Amendment to the Constitution, the whole contest shifts over to the House of Representatives for a so-called contingent election. The House chooses the president. And you say, well, why would Donald Trump and Steve Bannon want Speaker Pelosi and the Democrats in control of the House to choose the president? Well, under the 12th Amendment, we don't vote as one member, one vote. The way we usually vote, we vote one state, one vote. So there are 50 votes, and the Republicans, after the 2020 elections, controlled 27 states. We, the Democrats, control 22. One state, Pennsylvania, split down the middle. So even had they suffered the defection of the at-large representative from Wyoming, Liz Cheney, they still would have had 26 votes. They would have run it like the Republican convention, and they were prepared to declare Donald Trump the president. And at that moment, he would have been prepared, I believe, to invoke the Militia Act and to establish something like martial law in the country. That's what they would have done had Vice President Pence gone along with their plan. And the extraordinary thing about that day was that Mike Pence, who had demonstrated nothing other than invertebrate, obsequious sycophancy for 4 years, suddenly grew a spine and stood up for just doing his job in the Constitution. And he earned his salary on that day. And he refused the Secret Service's entreaty to leave the Capitol campus. He said, in some of the most chilling words I've ever heard in American politics, "I'm not getting into that car. I'm not getting into the car until we count the Electoral College votes." I was tasked with leading the impeachment effort against Donald Trump after he incited the violent insurrection against the Union on January 6th and attempted to conduct a coup against the 2020 presidential election. So in the constitutional sense, an impeachment is a vote by the House of Representatives bringing charges against a president or another high-ranking official. The Constitution says we have the authority to impeach a president for treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. That's obviously ill-defined, but it's generally been interpreted to mean serious offenses against the republic akin to treason and bribery. He was impeached by the House. Then it went to the Senate, and I led the team of impeachment managers in bringing out the whole factual proof of the president's central involvement in the insurrection and his constant incitement of the insurrection. And the vote was 57 to 43 in the Senate to convict him, which sounds like a pretty resounding majority, but unfortunately, it wasn't enough because of the 2/3 requirement. So he beat the constitutional spread, and nonetheless, we have now concurrent, bipartisan, bicameral majorities that have found that he did it. One of the advantages of an actual trial with a conviction is that the Senate at that point can proceed to disqualify the person from holding the office again and running for federal office, but we weren't able to do that. So Donald Trump is still at large today.
The question that I really would like you to address is, do you think it's also true that millions of Democratic supporters also don't really believe in the Constitution? They think it's rigged, they think it's fixed, that there wasn't the passion for the Constitution that you have amongst the many supporters of your party?
There was a lot of support and continues to be a lot of support for Donald Trump's big lie that he won the election within the Republican Party. Tens of millions of people have swallowed that nonsense hook, line, and sinker, which is why their party, it used to be Lincoln's party, now Trump's party, operates far more like a religious cult, like an authoritarian cult of personality, where whatever the cult leader says is the truth. There was a lot of support among the right wing in the Republican Party, which is to say the dominant wing in the Republican Party, for the coup element of it. They're trying to whitewash the insurrection, but when it first happened, I mean, they all could have been killed too. A lot of them were denouncing it as terrorism and so on. In fact, I saw one member of Congress yelling into his phone as we were evacuating, saying, "Y'all screwed it up. Y'all screwed it up good." In other words, the violent insurrection component got out of hand rather than just delaying and putting pressure on Vice President Pence. It overran the whole thing and then screwed up their ability to conduct the coup. So that's a complex story that we're trying to unravel. But as to the progressive side, we have a tightrope to walk because we have to defend the Constitution, including all of the rickety and obsolete parts of it, like the Electoral College, which is an absolute undemocratic relic of the 18th century. We got to defend the voting system as it exists at the same time that we're trying to reform and transform it as we move forward. We are the vast majority in the country, which is how, Hillary defeated him by 3 million votes and Joe Biden beat him by 7.5 million votes. And the young people are coming our way and the new Americans are coming our way. But what they've got is a bag of tricks. And those tricks are all anti-democratic levers of power. And one of them is the Electoral College, which is in the Constitution. Most of them are not in the Constitution. The gerrymandering of our congressional districts, which allows political minorities in the states to subdue electoral majorities in the states. The packing of our courts by the right wing, the judicial activism of their right wing judges, the right wing corporate dark money, and so on. That's what we're up against. And so it's totally a question of whether we can organize enough people power to overcome all of the anti-democratic instruments, some of them constitutional, some of them non-constitutional, that have been mobilized against us.
So would it be right to say that in order to save the constitutional tradition that you represent, you're arguing for the reinvention of the Constitution, or at least certainly the redemocratization of the Constitution?
Yeah, we need the amendment and the expansion of the Constitution. And that's been our history. If you look at the 17 amendments that we've had since the Bill of Rights, the vast majority of them are pro-democracy, suffrage enlarging, and suffrage deepening amendments. Yeah. And that's the whole trajectory of our history. We didn't start off as a democracy. We started off as a slave republic of white male property owners, but it's been through successive waves of social and political struggle that we've opened America up. And Tocqueville said in Democracy in America, he observed that democracy in America is always either shrinking and shriveling away or it's expanding and growing. And we just got to get back on the growth track, including by admitting some new states to the Union. Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico, we got millions of people who are disenfranchised and not represented in Congress.
Can I then ask another aspect of this question about the nature of the Constitution, and that is the relationship of money and corporate power, if you like. There's a sense in which people feel that in certain ways the political system has been stolen from them, and this is a rhetorical device, certainly, that Trump used.
It feels a little bit like ancient history now, but if you go back to the 2016 election, you'll see, in a nation that doesn't have very strong ideological identities for the political parties, that Trump managed to maneuver himself to the left of Hillary Clinton on a whole bunch of questions. He ran against the Iraq war and said Hillary supported it, and I'm not going to be getting you into all of these wars. He ran against Hillary because he said she's taking money from Wall Street and just made $400,000 in a speech with Goldman Sachs, and he attacked the free trade agreements and so on. So, people say, well, why did so many working class people support Trump? Well, he sounded like, the billionaire right winger from New York sounded like a more working class candidate to a lot of people. I think people were quickly disabused of that notion, but he's still, trying to run that basic scam.
But do you feel that the Democrats are themselves now, are they now articulating those kind of demands, that sort of sense of we need to get the power back in the way that Trump, if you say falsely, did?
I would say the answer is yes. You're hearing it from our party as a whole. We have a little bit of a future leadership vacuum, maybe. But I'm sure time will take care of that quickly. But yes, I think that the Democratic Party, with the infrastructure plan, a $1.9 trillion investment in the infrastructure of the country, with the American Rescue Plan, we are the ones who are trying to make the government a servant of the common good and the public interest. We're the ones that are doing that. We're the ones, Trump basically brought us to the verge of becoming a failed state, which the political scientists define as a state that can't deliver the basic goods of existence. During the worst public health calamity of our lifetimes, he was, hawking quack medical cures like hydroxychloroquine and injecting yourself with bleach and totally undermining the social cohesion and scientific clarity that you need to conduct a public health campaign.
Do you feel, given what you're saying, that you're looking for a kind of a progressive capitalism, for a shift? It's not socialism that you're arguing for, but it's not liberalism in the traditional top-down welfarist sense. So do you feel you're moving towards a kind of new political framework?
I think there's a healthy debate to be had between, say, Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders about whether we want to try to have the government take over our corporate behemoths, socialism style, or we want to break them up according to antitrust policies and the tradition of anti-monopoly, which is a very well anchored progressive tradition in American life. And I happen to think that's the better way to go, both on the merits and on the politics of it.
So you would like to see the democracy, so to speak, take command of capitalism rather than the other way around?
It's got to be that way. And so we're either going to have a democratic and demonopolized capitalism, or in truth, with Donald Trump and those guys, we're going to have gangster crony capitalism.
It sounds quite cold-hearted at the moment when the Ukrainian people are fighting for their lives against Putin's invasion. But I would still like to ask this question about what do you feel the impact, the longer-term impact of the invasion of Ukraine, and I'm quite confident its defeat will be, on American politics and the issues that we have talked about?
Well, we think democracy is under siege all over the world. That the gangster, kleptocrats, autocrats, bullies, tyrants, dictators, despots, they've all found each other, with Putin in Russia and Trump in America and Orban in Hungary and El-Sisi in Egypt and Duterte in the Philippines and Bolsonaro in Brazil and the homicidal crown prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, and President Xi in China. All of them, they've all found each other, and they really want to destroy democracy on earth. So the people of Ukraine are on the front lines of trying to defend democracy against the autocrats. It's like the Democrats versus the autocrats. So I think it's revitalizing and clarifying for us in America to have a struggle that poses so clearly what the stakes of our age are right now. And Trump is obviously on Putin's side and praising his genius and his savvy, because you have to be very brilliant to invade your neighbor and go out and kill tens of thousands of people. What a genius he is. What a genius Donald Trump is, and all of his cult followers in the Republican Party. But that's what we're up against, and that's what we've got to defeat. January 6th is Donald Trump's Ukraine, and Ukraine is Vladimir Putin's January the 6th. this is the moment where we see exactly what the destination of right-wing authoritarian politics is. It is war and it's fascism. So we've got the opportunity to stand up for strong democracy in America and around the world. And I think that the American people, a majority of the American people, are going to be standing strong with Zelensky, with Ukraine, with Joe Biden, with the Democrats in defending democracy. It's the Democrats versus the autocrats all over the world.